Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. The first thing Neka felt was not the pain in her ribs or the bandage pressing against her forehead, but the cold, sterile smell of the room, a mixture of antiseptic, metal, and something she couldn't name but would forever associate with regret. Her eyes fluttered open like the hesitant wings of a bird unsure if the wind would catch it, and there, standing like a man carved out of silence, was Obena, her husband. No soft smiles, no whispered prayers of thanks, just folded arms, pursed lips, and an expression carved from stone. His eyes, once a refuge, now bore the weight of something that hadn't yet been spoken but had already been felt. Neka tried to speak, but her throat was as dry as a desert fasted of rain. A nurse drifted in, all cheer and clipboard, announcing that she was lucky to be alive. "We were worried for a moment," the nurse said, adjusting Neka's fore. "But you pulled through. You must have angels watching." Neka wanted to believe that, but the last thing she remembered was not an angel. It was Lucas's car, the red taillights, the blonde head of a woman leaning toward him, and the flood of betrayal that had surged up in her chest like bile. Obena said nothing the entire time. He didn't touch her, didn't lean in, didn't ask if she was in pain. And that, more than the crash, more than the memory of twisted metal and screaming tires, was what made her heart ache. She knew at once, he knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to make the room between them colder than death. Recovery was a slow waltz with pain. Every breath came with a pinch, every movement echoed in her bones. But the ache in her body was nothing compared to the chasm in her marriage. Obena visited daily, dutiful but distant. He brought pap and fruit bowls, paid the bills without fuss, but never stayed longer than necessary. Neka noticed how he stared at her without seeing her, like someone trying to study a puzzle missing its last piece. She offered polite conversation, asked about their son Chuka, about the contractor handling the roof repairs, even about the dog that always barked at nothing behind the neighbor's gate. But Obena answered like a man fulfilling a contract, not a husband caring for his wife. Once, when the physiotherapist came in and joked that Neka must be strong-willed to survive such an accident, Obena simply said, "She's full of surprises." Neka felt her skin crawl with the weight of that sentence. Her mind was a hallway of closed doors, each one holding a memory too hot to touch. Lucas's face flashed again, the last time she saw him, parked outside Madame Nkechi's boutique, laughing with a woman who looked like she belonged in a perfume ad. Her blood had boiled like a pot left too long on the stove. She had followed his car, heart galloping like an untamed horse, and when he parked to kiss the stranger, something snapped. What happened next wasn't instinct, it was intention. The screech, the rush, the crunch of impact. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap, echoed in her mind like a forgotten song, Galatians 6 verse 7, but she never imagined she'd be reaping this kind of silence. Amara, her younger sister, came by with warm ofensala and eyes that asked more questions than her mouth dared. She hugged Neka tightly, held her hand too long, and spoke gently about healing and rest. "You scared all of us," she said, brushing Neka's hair behind her ear. "Obena hasn't said much, but he's been different." Neka nodded, too tired to lie, too ashamed to confess. She had always been the older sister who had it all together, the one who planned everything to the last detail, from her bridal train colors to the timing of her contractions. But this mess wasn't part of the script. Amara asked cautiously, "Do you remember what happened?" And Neka offered the same line she'd rehearsed in her head 100 times. "No, just the rain and the turn I didn't see." It was a poor lie, but it bought her peace, at least for now. Yet at night, sleep was a mirage. She lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, seeing Lucas's smirk as he noticed her car in the rear view, and how he didn't run, just smiled like he thought she wouldn't dare. But she did. The heart is deceitful above all things, and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Jeremiah 17 verse 9 had never felt so personal. She had lied to herself for months about the affair, about Lucas meaning nothing, about being in control. And now the truth was crawling toward her like a shadow that never left, whispering, "You aimed. You meant it. You're not the victim." Not this time. Rather this time, real lime pressing puzzle. Well of this, within the mind makes. Den devils I'm bitches briss, worth of perf, the father comes a fin bevers, which spread of the zabris motis time, or loss of her, to vavazosaf, or lussos recolanacher, but fall for bavosabches balwanis. The next morning, Obina brought her clothes and a discharge letter. "The doctor says you're stable enough to continue your healing at home," he said, not unkindly, but with a formality that stung. It was like being offered a ride by a stranger who shares your last name. He helped her into the car without a word, his hand grazing her elbow but never her skin. The drive back to Westbridge was quiet, save for the occasional hum of traffic and a gospel station playing softly in the background. When they pulled into the compound, Neka noticed her things were no longer in the master bedroom. Instead, a small room at the back, once her sewing space, had been set up with a bed, her toiletries, and a bag of medications. No explanation. No conversation. Just rearrangement. She opened her mouth to speak, but Obina had already gone upstairs. Her legs trembled under her weight as she stood in the room, the walls whispering what he wouldn't say. "He's done waiting for your version of the story." That night, as the compound generator hummed and dogs barked in the distance, Neka cried, not because of the accident, but because she knew what was coming. A storm was brewing, and this time, she couldn't steer out of its way. The air inside the back room smelled like camphor and memories, a blend of ointment, unused perfume bottles, and fabric from her unfinished designs. Neka sat upright on the edge of the bed, the silence thick as custard around her. The room that once held her creativity now boxed her in like a waiting cell. Obina hadn't returned downstairs since he dropped her off, and the echo of his footsteps still lingered in her ears like the end of a forgotten melody. Everything in the room was familiar, yet nothing felt like home. Her sketch pads were stacked neatly by the window, her mannequin stood in the corner, clothed in half-sewn ankara, as if waiting for the version of her that once had dreams. But that version had vanished somewhere between that U-turn and impact. She could hear Chuka laughing upstairs with the housekeeper, irate, oblivious to the storm beneath the surface of his parents' lives. Neka's hand trembled as she reached for her journal and tried to write, but all she could scribble was one phrase, "I nearly died, and he won't even ask why." Guilt danced across her skin like hot pepper dust. And shame. Shame was sitting in the corner, arms crossed, daring her to say its name out loud. By afternoon, Amara arrived unannounced with a flask of jollof rice and fried plantain, her voice too cheerful to be sincere. "I just wanted to check on you," she said, but her eyes scanned the room and lingered on the extra pillow on the floor. She knew something was off. "Why are you sleeping down here?" she asked. Neka lied again, her voice low. "I snore. Obina says I should recover in peace." Amara didn't believe it. Her silence said so. They ate together on the bed like girls hiding from punishment, the air between them filled with too many questions and not enough courage to ask. After the meal, Amara gently placed a hand on Neka's leg and said, "You know, secrets rot faster when kept in the dark." Neka looked away. She had memorized every lie she planned to tell herself before lying to others. Lucas had been like sweet poison, tasted good, killed slowly. And now, the aftermath of that foolish hunger sat heavy on her chest. Amara picked up one of the sketch pads and flipped through it, pausing at a page that had Lucas's side profile etched faintly in pencil, smudged by time but not forgotten. "Who is this?" Amara asked. Neka hesitated. Then, in a whisper, "Someone I should have left alone." Amara didn't press further, but as she left, she looked at her sister one last time and said, "Whatever it is, Nene, just remember that he that covereth his sins shall not prosper, but whoso confesseth and forsaketh them shall have mercy." Proverbs 28 verse 13. Neka nodded, not because she was ready, but because her lies were growing legs, and soon they would walk out the door without her consent. Later that evening, Obena came down for a cup of water. He stood in the kitchen, his shadow long against the tiled floor as Neka walked in quietly behind him. "Did the doctor say anything else?" he asked, not turning. "Just that I should avoid stress," she replied. Silence stretched between them like worn-out elastic too strained to hold anything meaningful. She watched him gulp the water and rinse the cup twice before placing it on the rack. It was the same way he cleaned his conscience, quick, methodical, without stains. Neka took a deep breath and said, "Obena, if you want to talk," but he cut her short. "Talk? About what? The crash? Or what happened before the crash?" She blinked, caught off guard. "I don't understand," she lied. He turned to her slowly, eyes now heavy. "Then maybe I should explain," he said, reaching into his phone. He pulled up a screenshot, Lucas and Neka, arm in arm, outside a hotel in Ajuma Street. She gasped. He continued, "I found it a week before the accident. I kept quiet because I wasn't sure. I told myself I'd wait. Then you drove into a car. And the man in it wasn't me." Neka's knees buckled slightly, but she steadied herself against the fridge. Obena's voice broke as he said, "You didn't almost die, Neka. You tried to kill something. Maybe someone. I just don't know who you were trying to destroy more, him or yourself." Her lies had bloomed like a weed she never bothered to uproot, and now it had overtaken everything. She wanted to explain, to apologize, but her tongue became a traitor in her mouth. Obena walked away, leaving behind the smell of menthol and truth. That night, Neka couldn't sleep. The house felt like it was breathing without her permission. Every creak of wood, every whisper of the wind outside, every distant sound of Chuka's dreams haunted her. She got up and walked to the backyard, barefoot on the cold cement, staring at the sky smeared with stars too distant to touch. She knelt on the gravel and began to cry, not the loud, dramatic sobs of pity, but the silent, guttural weeping that comes when your heart confesses before your mouth ever can. "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me," she whispered, Psalm 51 verse 10 trembling from her lips. The truth was no longer content being hidden. Her sin had a voice now, and it wouldn't stop speaking. She remembered the way Lucas had treated her toward the end, careless, dismissive, cruel. She had thought she was the one using him to fill a void, but in the end, she was the one emptied. She leaned against the mango tree in the yard and closed her eyes. Obena knew. Amara suspected. Lucas had vanished. And Chuka? Chuka still called her mummy, like nothing happened. That was what hurt the most, that her son didn't know he had nearly lost her to a moment of madness. The wind blew gently through the leaves, and for the first time in weeks, Neka prayed, not for a second chance at love, not even for her marriage, but for courage to face herself. The morning crept in slowly, not with the gentle hush of birdsong, but with the stubborn groan of a new day that didn't ask for permission. Neka stood by the window of the small room, watching the sun smear pale orange across the rooftops like an artist unsure of the next stroke. Her arms were folded across her chest, her breath forming little clouds on the glass pane. She hadn't slept. Not really. Every time she closed her eyes, Obena's voice echoed in her ears, calm, steady, final. His words had sliced through her spirit like machete through ripe plantain, precise, devastating. The weight of being found out had begun to settle into her bones. Her fingers still shook when she remembered that screenshot, that moment he laid the truth bare without rage or raised voice. That silence was more terrifying than a slap. That morning, Irene knocked gently and entered without waiting for a response, a tray balanced on one palm. "Your husband said to make sure you eat," she said softly, placing yam and egg sauce on the side table. Nneka nodded, but her appetite had gone where her pride once lived, buried under debris. "Thanks," she whispered. Irene lingered, looking as if she wanted to say something more, but didn't. As the door shut behind her, Nneka collapsed into the chair by the sewing machine, buried her face in her palms, and let the tears fall freely. The same hands that once stitched gowns and dreams now trembled under the guilt of bad decisions. A voice within her whispered, "The way of transgressors is hard," Proverbs 13, verse 15, and hers was already unbearable. By midday, the house was a theater of pretense. Obinna had gone to work, Chuka had been dropped off at his lesson teacher's place, and Nneka sat on the kitchen floor, knees drawn to her chest, staring at a burnt kettle she hadn't noticed in weeks. She hadn't spoken to Lucas since the accident, and though part of her wanted to pretend he no longer existed, the other part screamed for answers. She dug through her bag and found the old SIM card she had discarded after the crash, slid it into a spare phone, and waited for signal. The moment it connected, notifications flooded in, missed calls, unsent messages, and one video. Hands trembling, she tapped play. It was a short clip, barely 10 seconds, filmed from across the street. Her car. Lucas's car. Her car accelerating, his head turning. The other woman's scream. The crash. She dropped the phone like it was scalding water. Who had taken that video? And why send it now? Fear snaked up her spine like cold smoke. She opened the door and looked out. No one. No car parked unusually. No unfamiliar figure loitering. But the paranoia had planted its seed. She called the number that had sent the video, caller not reachable. Nneka's mouth went dry. Her sin wasn't just exposed, it was being documented. Someone else knew what she'd done, and it wasn't Obinna. She tried calling Lucas, but his line rang endlessly before switching off. The silence on the other end made her head spin. Her heart pounded like a drum in a village announcement. Someone out there had seen everything, and now she was at their mercy. And mercy, as she had learned lately, is a coin not easily tossed. When Obinna returned home later that day, he didn't ask about her or the food. He simply picked up Chuka's toys from the sitting room floor and began folding laundry in silence. The air between them was a wall, thick, invisible, but impossible to ignore. Nneka stood at the entrance of the kitchen, watching him, unsure if she had the right to speak. Finally, she said, "Obinna, there's something I need to tell you." He didn't stop folding, but she could see his jaw tighten. She stepped in, heart racing. "Someone sent me a video of the crash, from the outside. I think someone was watching or following." At that, he looked up, eyes narrowing slightly. "Did you tell Lucas?" She shook her head. "I tried reaching him. His line's dead." "He's disappeared." Obinna leaned against the wall and sighed. "Maybe he's running from the mess he helped create." Nneka lowered her gaze. "I'm scared. I don't know who recorded it or why they sent it to me." He was quiet for a long time, then said, "That's what sin does. It always finds an audience. You think you're playing behind closed doors, then one day the curtains part and the world sees your performance." His words, spoken without malice, stung deeper than insults. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she whispered. "But it did," he replied. "And now someone else holds the remote to your shame." Nneka looked away, blinking back fresh tears. "I just want peace." Obinna gave a bitter chuckle. Peace? Peace doesn't come from avoiding consequences. It comes when you're willing to face them. There is no peace, saith the Lord, unto the wicked. Isaiah 48 verse 22. He left the room, and the hum of the refrigerator became the only voice that stayed. At midnight, Nneka couldn't take it anymore. She stepped outside again, barefoot on the cold cement, the weight of secrets pressing against her shoulders like a mortar balanced on her back. The stars had hidden themselves behind clouds, as if even heaven didn't want to look at her. She walked to the edge of the fence and leaned her head against it, the chill kissing her skin. She remembered the first time Obinna had told her he loved her. It was in front of this same fence, under this same sky, years ago, when they were younger, gentler, and naive. Now, their love was a war-torn village, still there, but broken beyond quick repair. She clutched the video phone in her hand and whispered, "Lord, what do I do with this?" No answer. Just the rustling of leaves, the occasional cry of a restless bird, and the gnawing silence of consequence. Her chest heaved with quiet sobs, and for the first time in days, she said the name aloud. Lucas. The name felt foreign now. Not bitter, not sweet, just empty, like a dried well with echoes but no water. A scripture came uninvited to her mind. The wages of sin is death, Romans 6 verse 23. And while she wasn't buried beneath 6 feet of soil, she felt as though something in her had already died. She wiped her face, sat on the cool ground, and stared up into the shadows above, wondering if redemption was even possible when you'd already thrown away the map. The following week crept in with the weight of uncertainty clinging to its every hour, like a heavy cloak soaked in storm water. Nneka spent most of her time in the small room, drifting between moments of blank stares and frantic thoughts. Her body had healed enough to let her walk without a limp, but her soul still dragged its feet. Every knock on the gate made her flinch. Every buzz of her phone made her heart stammer. The anonymous video still burned in her mind, and her failed attempt to call Lucas had not only ended in silence, it had cracked something deeper inside her, a realization that whatever they had wasn't just over, it had never been real. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was punishment. On Thursday morning, a letter was slid under her studio room door. Plain white envelope. No name, no stamp. Her palm sweated as she picked it up. Inside was a single sentence scrawled in blocky ink. People don't crash cars for nothing. No signature. No return address. Just that single line, but it felt like a loaded pistol. The words turned her blood cold. It meant whoever was watching still had their eyes on her. She rushed to the door, swung it open, looked left and right. No one. The street was still. Even the mango tree stood like a silent witness. She walked slowly to the gate, her heart in her throat, and opened it to nothing but air and memory. It was like chasing a ghost whose footprints dissolved behind you. With shaking hands, she tore the letter and threw it into the dustbin, but even as she did, she knew. Tearing paper didn't tear away consequence. By midday, she was pacing around the compound like a caged cat, restless and alert. She knew she had to talk to someone, and Obinna was no longer just a husband. He was the cold wall she'd run into over and over again. Her feet led her to Amara's house without conscious effort, and when her sister opened the door, one look at Nneka's face made her wrap her into a hug so tight it felt like trying to squeeze pain out of her bones. "You look like a shadow walking," Amara whispered. They sat in the parlor, the fan humming above them and the kettle whistling on the gas. Nneka told her everything about the message, the video, the letter, and how Lucas had gone off the grid. She didn't cry. Her eyes were past tears. Her heart had entered the land of quiet devastation. Amara listened, her hand squeezing Nneka's knuckles until they turned white. "This is serious," she finally said. "You can't keep quiet anymore. If someone is stalking you, you need to go to the police." Nneka shook her head. "I can't. It's not just about what they're sending me. It's about what they know. If this gets out," her voice cracked. If Chuka finds out, if people start talking, Obina might never look me in the face again. Amara looked at her sister with eyes soft but steady. You're thinking of shame. I'm thinking of safety. You can't cover fire with a wrapper. One day it'll burn right through. Nneka leaned back and whispered, I don't know who I am anymore. Amara responded gently, then maybe it's time to find out. But first, go home. Talk to him. You owe him that. Nneka nodded slowly, her chest tight. She knew the truth had outgrown her control. When she returned home, the compound was quiet, but Obina's car was parked outside. The curtains in the parlor were drawn, the windows partly open. The house felt heavy, like it had swallowed too many secrets and was groaning under their weight. Nneka entered slowly, unsure of how to start, or even what to say. She found Obina in the living room, watching an old episode of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, volume low. His face bore the calmness of a sea hiding a storm beneath. She stood behind the sofa, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her blouse. I need to tell you something, she said. He didn't respond, but he muted the TV and stared at the blank screen. She sat beside him, knees close together like a student waiting to be scolded. Someone knows. About the crash, about Lucas. They're sending messages. First a video. Now a letter. Obina's head turned slowly toward her, his eyes now clear, focused. And what are they asking for? She shook her head. Nothing yet. Just threats. Warnings. Like they're waiting for me to break. He exhaled, long and slow. Or confess. She nodded, too tired to dodge. He leaned back, hands clasped. I need to ask you something, Nneka. She met his gaze. That day, did you try to kill him? The room froze. The walls leaned in. Her throat closed up. Then, with a whisper that held the weight of all her sorrow, I don't know. I wanted him to hurt like I did. Obina stared at her for a long time. You could have died. You could have killed someone else. Chuka could have lost both his parents to silence. Nneka whispered, I was broken. Obina stood and replied, being broken is no excuse to draw blood. Even Jesus wept, but he didn't destroy. Be ye angry, and sin not, let not the sun go down upon your wrath. He quoted from Ephesians 4, verse 26, voice trembling. Then he walked out, leaving her with her breath caught in her lungs. That night, the air outside was unusually still, as if even the trees had paused to eavesdrop. Nneka sat on the veranda, eyes fixed on the gate, half expecting another letter, another shadow. But none came. The silence wasn't peace, it was anticipation. She looked at her reflection in the window glass and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her hair was uncombed, her eyes hollow, her spirit exhausted. She clutched her knees and whispered, God, if you're still with me, show me how to end this. Her voice cracked under the weight of her own desperation. She remembered how her mother used to say, the truth may sleep, but it doesn't die. And now, hers had risen from its grave and was knocking at every door in her life. She reached for her Bible, dusted and rarely opened, and flipped aimlessly until her eyes landed on Psalm 34, verse 18. The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as be of a contrite spirit. It broke her. Finally. Fully. And through her tears, she whispered, then save me, because I have nothing left to offer. Upstairs, she heard Chuka's laughter. It reminded her that innocence still lived in the house she had nearly wrecked. She would tell the truth, she decided. Whatever it cost, the lies had done their damage. But perhaps, with enough courage and enough repentance, she could still climb out from under the rubble, one step at a time. The next morning arrived like a courier bearing both dread and clarity. Nneka awoke before the cock crowed, her eyes swollen from weeping and her heart brittle like pottery kissed by fire. There were no more illusions to cling to, no shadows to hide behind, just the raw ache of consequences inching closer like the hum of a distant train that would not be outrun. She folded her bed sheets with mechanical hands and dressed in silence, slipping into the long brown wrapper her mother had sewn years ago when things were still simple. Her palms trembled slightly as she reached for her phone, not to text Lucas again. She deleted his contact last night after prayer, but to write down every detail she could remember about the person who filmed the crash, the angle of the video, the license plate numbers, the time it was sent. She had decided she would tell Obena everything by evening. Not the polite, filtered version, but the entire mess with its thorns and stench intact. The truth had sat in her chest too long, like bad yam refusing to digest, and she needed to vomit it up before it rotted her completely. Her stomach twisted as she looked in the mirror. Her reflection didn't cry, didn't blink, didn't plead. It simply stared back at her like a witness to a crime, one that had gone too long unpunished. "I'm ready," she whispered, not because she was brave, but because she could no longer pretend to be anything else. When Obena returned from work that evening, the sky was already bruised with dusk, its orange fading into blue like a silent argument between day and night. He looked tired, shoulders slouched under the weight of someone carrying more than cement and spreadsheets. Nneka met him at the door, barefoot, her hands clasped together like a child about to confess, breaking the only good plate in the house. "Can we talk?" she asked gently. He nodded once and dropped his laptop bag on the small couch. They sat across from each other, no table, no buffer, no shield. She began slowly, from the beginning. She told him about how lonely she had felt, how Lucas had offered her a listening ear when he had been too busy building their future to notice her present. She didn't paint herself as a victim or him as a villain. She simply laid out the pieces of their brokenness, the affair, the regret, and the crash that almost buried them both. She admitted that rage had taken the wheel, and though she hadn't planned to hit him, she had followed Lucas with the kind of reckless fire that burns more than it heals. Obena sat still, barely blinking, his fingers interlocked on his lap. When she finished, the silence that followed was so heavy, it felt like even the walls were holding their breath. Finally, he exhaled, long and weary. "I wanted to hate you," he said, voice quiet but steady. "When I saw that picture, when I realized you weren't just drifting, you were gone." His words stung, but they were honest. "I thought of leaving. I packed my bags twice. But every time I saw Chuka, I remembered that love doesn't walk away because it's hurt. Sometimes it stays, bleeding." Nneka's tears spilled freely, not from pity, but from the terrifying mercy in his voice. "If you're waiting for me to forget," he added, "I can't promise that." "But I'm willing to start again, if you are." She nodded, overwhelmed. "I don't deserve this," she said. "No," he agreed, "but grace doesn't come to those who deserve it. It comes to those who need it." Then he stood and walked away, not in anger this time, but in quiet acceptance that healing begins one step at a time. Later that night, after Chuka had been tucked in and the house lay still like a sleeping beast, Nneka walked into the parlor and found Obena seated with his Bible open. He didn't look up, just gestured to the seat beside him. She joined him, and for a while they read in silence, hearts beating in rhythm like two people who had seen the worst of each other and still remained. Obena suddenly flipped to the book of Hosea and pointed. "Read this," he said. Nneka leaned in, eyes scanning the words slowly. "Then said the Lord unto me, Go yet, love a woman beloved of her friend, yet an adulteress. So I bought her to me for 15 pieces of silver." Hosea 3 verses 1-2. She stared at the passage, stunned. Obena closed the book and said, "It's not just about forgiveness. It's about choosing to love even when the contract has been violated, even when the heart still limps." His voice cracked. "I'm not Hosea. I'm still angry, still healing, but I'm not ready to throw away our history because of one chapter." Neka wept silently, the kind of weeping that comes from being loved deeper than you deserve. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. Don't, he replied. Just never lie to me again, not even to protect me. Let me bleed with you, not behind you. They sat like that for what felt like hours, surrounded by scriptures and silence. For the first time since the accident, Neka felt like someone had finally thrown her a lifeline, and this time she wouldn't let go. In the days that followed, things didn't magically become perfect. Trust didn't grow back overnight, and the wounds didn't vanish with prayer and porridge. But something began to shift in the house. Neka moved back into the master bedroom, not as a wife reclaiming territory, but as a woman returning to rebuild. They ate dinner together, even if the silence sometimes lingered longer than the food. They prayed together, even when the words felt forced. And slowly, like a cracked wall sealed brick by brick, their bond began to mend. One afternoon, as they folded laundry together, Obena looked at her and asked, "Did you ever love him?" Neka paused, thought deeply, and answered, "No. I think I loved the way he made me feel, not him." Obena nodded, not to approve, but to acknowledge the truth of it. "Then I hope you remember how that feeling nearly destroyed everything." She replied, "I remember every day." He smiled faintly and added, "Good. Then let it teach you." Outside, the sound of Chuka's laughter filled the compound, chasing the ghosts from the corners. Neka looked out the window and whispered to herself, "He restoreth my soul," Psalm 23 verse 3. She wasn't whole yet, but she was no longer shattered. And sometimes, in the ruins of what you almost lost, you find the beginning of something stronger than what you had before. The rainy season arrived with little warning, washing the dust off the roofs and rinsing the heat from tired streets. It was as if the heavens had decided to pour out what the people had kept buried: regret, secrets, and the remnants of forgotten prayers. In their house, the rain always sounded louder, pressing against the windows like a mother's stern hand telling a child to sit down and think. Neka stood by the glass with her fingers tracing the condensation, her breath fogging small clouds on the pane. It had been 3 weeks since her confession, and the quiet between her and Obena had shifted from uncomfortable to healing. They spoke more often now, carefully, like people recovering from a long illness. Some mornings still hurt, especially when they ran out of words and filled the silence with cautious smiles or half-finished glances. But there was progress, even if it moved like a tired snail dragging its shell through wet sand. That afternoon, Obena returned from work early and handed her an envelope. "You might want to see this," he said. She opened it slowly and saw the same photo, the one of her and Lucas outside the hotel. Only this time it had been printed on glossy paper, and beneath it was scribbled, "You still owe me answers." No signature. Her hands went cold. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "It was on my car windshield at the office," he replied. Same handwriting, same intent. Her throat tightened. "Why now?" Obena didn't answer. He didn't have to. They both knew that some ghosts don't rest until they finish what they started. That night, after putting Chuka to bed and double-checking that the gate was locked, Obena and Neka sat in the living room, cross-legged like students of a problem neither of them fully understood. "I think we need help," she said softly, her voice wrapped in the cotton of fear and fatigue. Obena nodded. "From who? The police?" Neka shook her head. "No. And maybe from someone who can guide us, a pastor, a counselor. This hole we're climbing out of, we can't do it alone." Obena looked down at his hands, then lifted his eyes to hers. "It's not just you who needs healing. I've had my own silence too, my own bitterness. I stopped seeing you. I saw everything else, work, bills, plans, but I stopped looking at you. And someone else did. And now, here we are." His voice didn't carry blame. It carried reflection. "I think I buried my heart and assumed you'd never notice it was gone. Neka covered her mouth to stifle a sob. "You didn't deserve what I did," she said. "But I wanted to feel something. I didn't know how empty I was until Lucas offered me noise." Obinna reached out and took her hand. "The thief cometh not but for to steal, and to kill, and to destroy," he quoted John 10 verse 10, and now we know what that looks like. They stayed like that, hand in hand, as the rain softened into drizzle and the power flickered out. In the dark, they leaned into each other, not because the light was gone, but because they had finally decided to stop pretending it wasn't. The following morning, they visited Pastor Osei, an old friend of Obinna's and someone who had counseled couples long before the word therapy became fashionable. The man welcomed them with the smile of someone who had seen plenty of broken glass and knew how to kneel among the shards without getting cut. Over cups of ginger tea, they laid their story bare, no sugar, no edits. Pastor Osei listened quietly, nodding only when necessary, asking questions that peeled back layers like an onion yielding its core. When they finished, he closed his Bible and said, "The greatest miracle is not that Christ rose from the dead. It's that he gave us the power to rise from what tried to kill us. You both have bled, yes, but now it's time to bandage." He gave them scriptures to study together, not just read. James 5 verse 16. Proverbs 24 verses 16, and 1 Corinthians 13:7. He didn't promise that trust would bloom overnight. It's like farming, he said. The seed of truth needs watering, and sometimes weeds of doubt will grow beside it. Your job is to keep pulling them out. They thanked him, not because everything was fixed, but because someone had finally pointed them toward the sunlight. As they left the small church office, Neka looked at Obinna and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." He squeezed her hand and replied, "Thank you for not driving away again." 3 months later, on a Sunday morning thick with humidity, Neka stepped out of their gate dressed in a yellow blouse and jeans, her edges laid, her spirit steady. Beside her, Obinna carried Chuka's backpack as they headed to a family counseling seminar organized by the church. Things weren't perfect, but they were real. The anonymous messages had stopped as abruptly as they had started, and after reporting it to a trusted contact in the community watch, they learned that Lucas had been seen at the airport weeks earlier, boarding a flight with the same woman from that terrible day. Gone, like smoke, like a chapter finally closed. Obinna no longer needed to ask questions. Neka no longer needed to hide answers. They now lived with their eyes open, hearts unguarded but watchful. Every Sunday after service, they'd sit under the big almond tree in the churchyard and share roasted corn, just the three of them. The conversations had changed, from what had been lost to what could still be found. As they sat that afternoon beneath the tree, Chuka humming to himself, Neka opened her Bible and pointed to Psalm 126 verse 5. Obinna read it aloud. "They that sow in tears shall reap in joy." And in that moment, surrounded by echoes of forgiveness and the smell of hope roasted golden, Neka smiled, not because the storm had passed, but because it hadn't drowned her. It had cleaned her. Sometimes, the greatest battles we fight aren't with other people. They're with ourselves, our silence, our secrets, and the pain we think we've buried. But no matter how far you've gone, there's always a road back if you're willing to walk it with truth, humility, and courage. Healing doesn't always arrive wrapped in perfection. It often comes clothed in honesty, repentance, and grace. Don't wait for a crash to be your wake-up call. If you still have breath, you still have a chance. Father, we thank you for being the God who sees beyond our mess and still calls us worthy of mercy. For everyone listening today, anyone nursing heartbreak, hiding shame, or crying behind closed doors, we ask for healing that goes beyond surface, for restoration that only you can bring. Let broken homes be mended, let bitter hearts find softness again, and let peace flow like a river through every troubled soul. May love not just return, but return stronger. May truth reign, and may forgiveness find a seat at every table where pain once sat. In the name of Jesus, we pray, wherever there was a wound, let there now be wisdom. Wherever there was guilt, let there be growth. And wherever there was silence, Let there now be songs. If you believe it, let your amen be loud and strong. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.